The drop pod slammed into the red crust of Aegis 3 like a meteor. Grit fanned outward in a plume of burnt sienna, and the emergency stabilizers hissed, anchoring deep into the planet's brittle surface. Inside the pod, the lights flickered once and then steadied to an amber glow. The interior was almost silent except for the faint, ragged breathing of the man sprawled on the floor, half-conscious, bleeding from a gash above his eyebrow. Jack Monroe blinked hard, his vision swimming in and out of focus. For a moment he thought he'd blacked out, but no, he was still in the pod, still alive, and the rest of the terraform team was gone. No, not the whole team. There was a soft whimper behind him, barely audible beneath the quiet hum of failing systems. Jack twisted his torso, wincing as pain shot up his side, possibly cracked ribs. He bit down on the groan and forced himself to crawl toward the sound. In the survival cradle, nestled between two oxygen tanks, was a girl, 5, maybe 6 years old, 5 blonde hair matted to her forehead, her cheeks streaked with dirt. Her name was Willa, he remembered now. She was the daughter of Dr. Karen Mullen, the biosystems analyst, the same analyst who, according to the last logs, had made the final call to evacuate 3 days ago. They had left her behind. Jack's fingers tightened around the cradle's rim. He pushed aside the fury rising in his throat and gently checked the girl's vitals. Breathing shallow but regular. Pulse was there. No visible wounds. Probably sedated for transport and forgotten in the chaos when the terraforming team bailed. Probably thought she was already on board. Outside, the wind howled across the rocks. Aegis 3 had been labeled uninhabitable. Too arid, too unstable, too chemically inert. The atmospheric processors had failed their benchmarks. The bioseeding hadn't taken. The corporation scrubbed it. The team was ordered out. Jack had been tasked with dismantling a perimeter beacon. Wrong place, wrong time. He and Willa were now the only 2 souls on the entire planet. 3 hours later, Jack had triaged his injuries. 2 cracked ribs, some minor internal bruising, mild dehydration. Painful but survivable. He set up the medbay stretcher for Willa, placed her gently under the warming lamp, and began a full inventory of supplies. Enough rations for 2 months, oxygen filters for 6. The shelter dome's backup reactor still had fuel. Aegis 3 hadn't yet stripped away all their odds. He waited for Willa to wake. It took 12 hours. She didn't speak at first. She just stared at him, wide-eyed and distrustful, fingers clutching the edge of the blanket. Jack, sitting on an overturned equipment case, gave her space. "I'm Jack," he said finally, after her gaze started drifting toward the small window slit. The landscape beyond was all scarred ridges and empty desert. "I stayed behind, like you." Her lips parted. A whisper, "Where's my mom?" She had to leave early. Something happened during evac. They didn't see you were still inside. He didn't lie. He didn't make it pretty. She didn't cry. "I saw you before," she murmured. "In the labs. You fixed the water thingy." "That's right. I drew you." He blinked. "You what?" Willa reached under the blanket and pulled out a folded scrap of synth paper, crumpled and worn. A child's drawing, stick figures in suits, a dome, a spidery sun. She pointed to the tallest figure with a smudge of red on its side. "That's you." Jack's throat tightened. "You got good instincts." Willa looked down at the paper. "This place isn't dead," she said, not looking at him. "I don't think it's dead." No one ever said Aegis 3 was dead. The phrase in the report was chemically stagnant, biologically void, unsuitable for terraforming. It didn't feel the same, though, hearing it from her. She wasn't arguing science, she just felt it. Jack watched her for a long time. Over the next several days, they settled into a rhythm. Mornings started with protein rations and electrolyte packs. Jack had to calibrate the air filters daily and check the reactor every third shift. The dome was intact, but vulnerable. Aegis 3's thin atmosphere and erratic solar flares made it unpredictable. Willa spent her time in the dust garden. It wasn't a real garden, just the southern quadrant outside the dome, where the soil was shallow and fine. She used her fingers, sometimes a scavenged sensor stylus, to draw in the dust. Figures, faces, creatures with long tails and tall ears. She gave them names, stories, whole conversations. Jack watched her from the dome's viewport, always checking the exterior suits first, always ready in case she wandered too far. "Do you want to know their names?" she asked him one afternoon, when the sky had shifted to its muted indigo. Jack glanced up from the deionizer he was tuning. "Sure." She pointed with both hands. "That's Vega. She has wings but can't fly unless someone's watching. And that's Malo. He makes soup from stardust. That's Lint. He hides behind rocks and whispers riddles." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Quite the bunch." She turned, solemn. "They were already here. I just found them." The hair on his neck rose. He kept his tone easy. "You mean, in your drawings?" "They're from here. They were asleep. Now they're not." He didn't press her further. Children had imaginations. In isolation, even more so. But something about the certainty in her voice lingered in his mind. It began 2 days later. The dome's external humidity sensors registered a spike. At first, Jack assumed it was a glitch. Aegis 3 had never retained moisture. But readings stayed consistent. Then came the second anomaly: trace organic compounds in the upper soil crust. Not bioengineered, not from their equipment. Native. Jack stood outside, helmet locked, looking out over the dust garden. Willa's drawings stretched across the terrain like ancient glyphs. The wind hadn't erased them. Some had deepened. Others had sprouted tiny, translucent threads curling outward from the lines. Fungal growth. "Willa," he said when he returned. "What did you do out there?" She frowned, confused. "I just play. I draw them. Then I talk to them." "What do you talk about?" She shrugged. "Everything. I tell them stories." That night, he scanned the soil samples under the lab's micro-imager. The fungal threads weren't native. They were new. But not from their stores either. Some mutation of early-stage mycelium. Self-organizing, heat-sensitive, dormant until triggered. Triggered by what? By stories? Over the next weeks, the anomalies increased. Microbial colonies began populating the dust garden. Some glowed faintly at night. Others clustered around Willa's drawings, forming patterns too organized to be random. Jack set up cameras. Time-lapse footage showed movement slow, purposeful creeping of life through etched lines. And every day, Willa added more. She whispered to them, she giggled, she sang lullabies. Jack began transcribing everything she said. He mapped out the garden's evolving biostructure. He stopped believing in coincidence. Then came the tremors. Not seismic, not tectonic. Rhythmic pulses beneath the soil, like a heartbeat miles deep. Jack felt them when he lay awake at night. The readings on his scanner were always inconclusive. But the plants, yes, now plants reacted. They bent slightly in the direction of the pulses, as if listening. One evening he sat beside Willa as she traced a new figure in the dirt. "What's this one's name?" he asked. "Her name is Deva," Willa said, voice soft. "She's a dream. She can't wake up unless someone promises to remember her." Jack hesitated. "And if they don't?" Willa looked up. "Then the planet stays asleep." He didn't say anything for a long time. Later, alone, Jack reviewed all the logs. The failed terraforming attempts. The reports dismissing Aegis 3 as inert. The scans that had shown no viable biosphere. What if they were all right, but only because no one had dreamed hard enough? What if Willa was the key? Not because of any technology, but because she treated the dust as a canvas, not a test bed. Jack Monroe, engineer, survivor, reluctant caretaker, found himself afraid to sleep, not because of danger, but because, at last, he believed. The planet wasn't dead. It had just been waiting for a dreamer. The smell was the first thing he noticed. Faint, earthy, like wet stone after a hard rain, except it hadn't rained on Aegis 3 in geological memory. Jack blinked awake in the dome's corner cot and sat up too fast, ribs protesting with a tight stab of pain. He winced, steadied his breath, and listened. Silence, as usual. No birds, no wind through leaves, just the steady thrum of the reactor and the soft purr of the environmental regulator. But that smell, it didn't come from inside. He checked the air filtration system. No leaks, no foreign compounds detected, but still, it lingered. He slipped into his outerwear, ran a full diagnostic on his suit seal, and stepped into the airlock. Outside, the sky was the color of steel wool. Overhead, pale clouds gathered in a broken spiral pattern, strange and beautiful. He walked toward the dust garden, each step crunching over hardpack. What he saw stopped him cold. There were sprouts, dozens, thin green shoots pushed up in clusters along the edges of Willa's newest drawing. Not just mold or mycelium now plants, short, stalky, with fibrous leaves and swelling nodes. Jack crouched low and pulled out a sampling probe. The roots had taken hold, real roots, in Aegis 3's hostile, nutrient-starved soil. The planet was changing, and Willa was in the middle of it all. She was kneeling in the far quadrant, her hands pressed flat to the ground, head tilted forward like she was listening. Her lips moved silently. Jack walked over, not wanting to startle her. "What are you doing?" he asked quietly. "I'm telling her what happened before," she said without turning. "So she remembers. The one under the dirt, I think her name's Dava still, but maybe she forgot. I have to help her remember what trees are and how the wind sounds." Jack crouched beside her, resting a hand on his knee. "How do you know she's listening?" She hummed. Willa closed her eyes. "I can feel it in my chest." That night, Jack sat at the communications console with his head in his hands. The beacon still worked, just barely. He'd sent a low-band signal 6 days ago, no response. A second, more urgent ping 3 days later, silence. Either no one was listening, or they didn't care. Corporate had washed their hands of Aegis 3, scrubbed the project. Maybe they'd archived the records. Maybe not. Jack knew enough about field work to understand what this meant. No backup was coming. And yet, he didn't feel abandoned. Not anymore. He turned back to the console and recorded a new log. This one wasn't a distress call, it was documentation. Subject: Emergent biogenesis unplanned. Notes: cross-reference with failed bioseeding attempts. Soil samples show signs of modified alkaloids and root-binding structures. The catalyst remains uncertain. No technological triggers present. Hypothesis: cognitive/emotional interaction from human subject may be influencing dormant organic material. Further observation required. He tagged the log and encrypted it. Then he stood, stretched carefully, and walked back to Willa's room. She'd drawn on the walls. Not with ink, but with pressed dust from the garden, mixed with water and the pulped stalks of the plants. Crude pigments. Lines curled across the panels in looping, abstract forms. Jack ran his fingers across one. "What's this?" he asked. "It's how she talks back," Willa said from the bed. He turned. "The planet? She doesn't speak in words, just shapes. But their feelings, too." He studied the curling marks again. They looked like wind currents, water spirals, coiling shells. She had mixed in tiny seeds between the cracks, and in the morning he saw that a few had sprouted. He didn't pretend to understand it, but he didn't dismiss it either. Weeks passed. The dust garden turned green at the edges. The sprouts grew taller. The air, once dry and metallic, took on a richer tone. At night, the soil radiated warmth. Jack adjusted the environmental controls to lower the dome's contribution. He needed to know how much of the change was natural. One morning, Willa was missing. Jack woke to a blank cot and a pit in his stomach. He tore through the airlock and sprinted across the ridge, pain flaring in his chest, boots skidding in the gravel. He found her half a kilometer out, standing barefoot in a narrow ravine. The ground around her shimmered faintly. Some kind of biofilm clung to the rocks, glowing in soft pulses. She turned slowly when he reached her. "I didn't mean to scare you," she said. "You can't just leave like that," Jack gasped, hands on his knees. "This planet's still dangerous. You're not immune just because it listens to you." She frowned. "I wasn't trying to leave. I was following her." He straightened. "The planet? She shows me things in dreams. Then I wake up and follow them. This one was a canyon. It's where she keeps the blue ones." Jack blinked. "Blue what?" Willa stepped aside, and Jack saw them. Small, coiled organisms, plant-animal hybrids nested in the rock face. Blue as cobalt, pulsing gently in rhythm with the deeper tremors. Bioluminescent sacs swayed in the thin breeze, shedding tiny spores that glistened as they floated upward. "I think they're how she breathes," Willa whispered. Jack knelt, filmed everything, collected spores in sterilized tubes, ran real-time scans. They were alive, and more than that, they were communicating. Pulsed intervals, chemical triggers, like lungs and neurons combined, a nervous system for a planet. Later that night, back in the dome, Jack reviewed the footage, cross-referenced spore data. The blue organisms weren't just new, they were connected. Every part of the biosphere that had begun to awaken the dust garden, the glowing plants, the pigment-slick walls, they were all threaded together by the same base proteins. This wasn't evolution. It was memory. Somehow, the planet had remembered how to live. Not from seeding, not from code, but from Willa's stories. And Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the planet had been listening for a very long time, waiting for a voice it could trust. 2 months in, Willa came down with a fever. At first, Jack thought it was the flu, a lingering contaminant, maybe something from the biofilm. He moved her to the quarantine bed, lowered the dome's ambient temperature, and monitored her vitals. Temperature, 1002.4. Heart rate elevated. White cell count, slightly raised. Cough, dry, intermittent. No rash, no vomiting, no bacterial flags. He ran every diagnostic he could, triple-checked the biolab, filtered the water again. Still, her fever persisted. For 3 days, she barely moved. He sat beside her, barely leaving the cot. His ribs ached from sleeping upright. His voice grew hoarse from telling her the same story, over and over. The story she told the planet. "You told her about trees," he said, "and soup made from stars. You told her about your mom's songs and how your stuffed bear always smelled like dryer sheets, even in space." Willa didn't respond. Her eyes fluttered once, then closed. Jack pressed a cool rag to her forehead. He was scared in a way he hadn't felt since Earth's storms had taken his brother 15 years ago. He didn't pray, he didn't beg, he just stayed. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Willa stirred. Her voice was a whisper. She was scared too? Ace? The planet. She didn't mean to make me sick. She just wanted to say hello. Jack exhaled. For the first time in days, he smiled. That evening, a low mist drifted through the dust garden. Jack stood outside, helmet off. The mist clung to his boots, tasted faintly sweet. He bent down, touched the soil. Damp. Real moisture. It hadn't rained. The planet had sweated. Sweated through pores in the rocks, through the tendrils of life that Willa had awakened. A nervous system stretching across miles. A respiration cycle, and now, circulation. He thought of all the worlds declared dead by impatient scientists, all the places that had been scanned, charted, dismissed. What if life didn't just die? What if, when wounded badly enough, it chose to sleep? And what if all it needed to wake up was someone who cared enough to dream for it. The satellite dish groaned as it turned. For 2 weeks, Jack had been tinkering with the long-range uplink, salvaging parts from the crash pod, rerouting power from the southern turbine, even scavenging magnetic couplers from a broken rover. He kept the project secret from Willa. She had recovered, was back on her feet, but still slept too deeply some nights, and he didn't want to burden her with hope. It wasn't for rescue anymore. It was for proof. He initiated the signal on the 17th day. A narrow beam burst, packed with encrypted biological data, soil scans, time-lapse recordings of sprouting plants, and at the center of it all, a 2-minute video of Willa kneeling in the dust garden, her fingers drawing, her voice reciting a story about a lonely mountain that wanted to become a friend. He routed it through 2 old corporate relay buoys still orbiting Aegis 3. If the links held, the message would reach the outer colonies in 3 weeks. If not, it would bounce off the vacuum, unheard. That night, Willa stood in the garden, arms outstretched. Her dress had once been navy blue, a standard-issue child's uniform. Now it was stained with mineral streaks, pollen, and 1,000 dust-sketched dreams. She twirled slowly, laughing. "She's showing me new things," she said. "Like what?" Jack asked from the viewport. "Caves. Deep ones. With glass inside them, and something older than her. It's still sleeping too." The cave came to her in a dream. A twisting spiral beneath a broken plateau, marked by an arch that curved unnaturally, a shape too clean for erosion, too intentional for chance. The next morning, Willa walked Jack to the edge of the ridge and pointed. "There," she said, not with uncertainty, but as if she were identifying a place she'd been many times before. Jack checked the map. The area hadn't even been fully surveyed, too unstable. Marked as structurally compromised during the first Terra Team deployment. He weighed the risks. If they went, they had to take a portable shelter, medkits, rations, the portable air generator. It was a 3-day walk minimum, and Jack's ribs still throbbed when he twisted too fast. But she was sure. And somehow, he believed her more than he believed the risk. They set out the next morning. The terrain wasn't as hostile as it had once been. Lichens now spread in patches along the rocks. The mist clung to hollows during the night, and morning dew left beads of water along the newer stalks. Birds hadn't returned, nor insects. But the silence was no longer empty. It took them 4 days to reach the plateau. Willa walked without complaint, a small pack strapped to her back. Jack watched her carefully, monitoring for signs of fatigue. She handled herself like someone twice her age. She didn't speak much along the way, except when the land changed. She'd point to a new species plant or crystal or something between and name it. "That's a dream flint," she said once. "They only grow where someone cried." Another time, "That one's a whisper spike. It can't stand being alone, so they grow in rings." Jack didn't question anymore. When they reached the arch, he stopped in his tracks. It wasn't natural. Carved from black stone, veined with luminous mineral threads, it rose 12 feet high, tapering in a perfect curve. No tool marks, no wear. Beneath it, the entrance to the cave yawned open, deep and dark, breathing out a cold, slow wind that smelled faintly of salt and ash. "Did your stories make this too?" he asked. Willa shook her head. "No. This is older, she just forgot it was here." Jack activated his wrist light and scanned the entrance. Safe oxygen levels, no gas pockets. The cave sloped downward, smooth-walled, spiraling. They entered. Inside, the walls gleamed faintly. Not crystal, something softer, reactive, like the biofilm, but older, dormant. As they descended, their footsteps echoed in odd harmonics, not quite matching the rhythm of their steps. Then the tunnel widened into a chamber. And there, in the center, was a pool. Not water, but a thick, mirror-like liquid, dark as obsidian but not opaque. It pulsed every few seconds, dimly lit from within. Around the pool, formations rose pillar-like, grown, not built. The floor was warm underfoot. Jack checked his sensors. The temperature had risen 4 degrees since they entered. "She calls this her heart," Willa said, her voice quiet. "The planet." Jack moved closer. The surface of the pool didn't reflect him. Instead, it showed shifting images. Clouds over trees, oceans on fire, empty streets, faces. He saw Willa's, then his own, then something vast and spined, coiled like a sleeping serpent beneath the skin of the world. He backed away slowly. "What is it?" "She remembers everything," Willa said, "even the pain." Jack dropped to one knee, breath catching. Not fear overwhelmed. "Is she showing us?" he asked. Willa nodded. "She's asking if we'll keep her company." Back at the dome, everything had changed. In their absence, the biosphere had erupted. Green carpets of grass-like growth blanketed the garden. Seedlings taller than Jack now swayed under the dim red sun. The mist was heavier, thicker. It smelled alive. Willa spent hours sketching new beings in the soil, and Jack realized she no longer invented them. She remembered them. Each one came with a name, a purpose, a place in the new web. Her dreams weren't creating life. They were coaxing it out of hiding. Some plants began blooming with colors he'd never seen, pinks laced with ultraviolet threads, petals that curled inward like they were listening. Root systems now pushed up small nodes that pulsed faintly under touch. Jack ran hundreds of new samples. The mycelium wasn't just spreading, it was networking. Everything was connecting to everything else. Then the soil began to shift. Not sink, not collapse. Breathe. Willa called it her sigh. "He's glad we stayed," she said. Jack logged everything, updated the beacon twice a week now. Still no answer, but he didn't care. The dome had begun to feel temporary, like training wheels. The air outside was slowly changing oxygen saturation, creeping upward, humidity levels stable, bacterial diversity increasing in waves. He watched Willa sleeping one night, curled under a blanket near the viewpoint. She stirred and whispered, eyes still closed. "She wants you to tell a story, too." Jack blinked. "Me?" She says it's time. He hadn't told stories in years, not since the floods, not since Earth stopped feeling like home. The next morning, he stepped into the dusk garden. And he drew. Clumsily, slowly, he shaped a spiral. Then a figure. He spoke aloud, told the story of how he came here, how he broke ribs, how he thought no one would come for them, how he stayed not because of duty, but because he saw something worth staying for. And the planet listened. A new bloom opened beside his foot, wide and golden, humming low. That night, it rained for the first time. Not just mist, not condensation. Real rain. Willa ran outside, barefoot, laughing, arms flung wide. Jack followed, suit forgotten, face turned upward. The rain was warm, sweet, and it fell with the gentleness of welcome. For the first time, Aegis 3 smelled like life. The rain didn't last long, just 40 minutes, but it soaked the soil in a way no technician's irrigation pipe ever had. The earth drank it, not just absorbed, welcomed. Jack watched puddles form, then disappear, as roots beneath the ground pulsed faintly, like capillaries rediscovering circulation. When he scooped a handful of dirt the next morning, it crumbled rich and dark in his glove. Willa called it her first real laugh. It had been 3 months since the evacuation, 94 days by the dome's counter. The beacon still blinked, still sent data into the dark, but Jack no longer waited by the console. He documented everything because it mattered, not because he needed a reply. Outside, the dust garden was gone, replaced by a tangle of greens and amber-hued fronds, with spires of translucent growth that rose shoulder-high, whispering as they swayed. The temperature had stabilized. CO2 levels dropped daily. The planet was no longer pretending. It had decided. Life had returned, but more than that, life had remembered itself. Jack woke each day before dawn now, stiff but steadier than he'd felt in years. The ribs had mostly healed, tender with heavy lifting, but manageable. He had fashioned crude braces for the heavier field equipment using cuttings from the tougher vines, which hardened after harvest and flexed like carbon filament when cured. He no longer thought about how long he'd stay. He started thinking in terms of seasons. "Do you think she was always like this?" Willa asked one morning as they sat near the water basin, once a dust collection trough, now a small pond teeming with finger-length dartfish that sparkled like mercury. Jack shook his head slowly. "I think she was hurt, maybe poisoned, maybe broken by something before we came." Willa swirled her finger in the water. The fish darted toward it, then scattered. "She said it was a long time ago, before machines, before anyone tried to tell her what to be." He nodded. It made sense now why the terraforming tech failed, why no seeds ever took. The planet had been resisting. Not dead, not barren, just refusing to be overridden. She didn't want to be planted on, Willa said, echoing his thought. She wanted someone to ask what she was. And Willa had asked. Jack rose and walked to the garden's edge, making his daily check on the air monitors. The readings had shifted more in the past week than in the last month. Oxygen at 17.2% and climbing, nitrogen balance improving. Still unbreathable for long stretches without filtration, but getting close. Too close for it to be coincidence. That evening, Willa brought him a drawing, this time not in the dirt. She had woven together pressed bark and polished leaves, then etched on them with the carbon-tip stylus Jack had given her. It was a figure, a tree, but not like any tree on Earth. Its roots stretched into an outline of a curled shape, like a sleeping child. Above, clouds shaped like faces and hands circled a sun. Jack tilted it slightly. "What is it?" "Frozen moons." "Her," Willa said simply. "And me. And you." He looked at the image again. The sky in the drawing had color now, bands of muted red and yellow with a haze of violet. It was accurate. The atmosphere had refracted the light differently that week. It was real. The next day they woke to a sound Jack hadn't heard since his training days. Low, distant, atmospheric. He ran to the comms console. The radar screen flashed. One contact. Low orbit. Suborbital descent in progress. Emergency registry flagged. Civilian science vessel. They were coming in hot. Jack flipped open the external channel and began transmitting on all open bands. "This is Jack Monroe, survivor of the Aegis III terraforming operation. Coordinates uplinked. Dome intact. Life signs, 2. Repeat, 2 survivors on surface. Atmospheric conditions altered, visual confirmation of emergent biosphere." The signal light blinked 3 times, then went solid. Reply aware received. They had been heard. The lander came down cautiously, rear thrusters flaring to avoid damaging the new growth. When the hatch hissed open, 2 figures emerged, one in a standard biosuit, the other in a reinforced scan rig. The lead scientist approached slowly, eyes wide behind the visor. "This can't be AGS-3, he said through the intercom. Jack stepped forward, Willa just behind him. "It is." But this place was a write-off. The report said chemically inert, low organic profile. That was before she was ready to wake up. The scientist stared. Willa stepped up beside Jack. The planet. She just needed someone to tell her a story first. The woman in the scan rig crouched beside one of the glowing spiral plants. "This isn't genetically tagged. This wasn't seeded. What the hell are we looking at?" Jack exhaled, smiling faintly. "Memory. Rebirth. Call it what you want. But don't call it a failure." They didn't leave that day. The scientists set up temporary domes outside the old habitat, careful not to disturb the root systems. Scanners ran constantly. Reports shot back to the outer colonies. Within a week, a second lander arrived. Then a third. Some of them wanted to call the planet Willa's world. Jack shut that down, gently but firmly. No, he said, she already has a name. It's Deva, that's what she called herself. The name caught. Quietly, then in official reports. Planet Dava, status changed to class livable, conditionally. Emergent life form presence verified. Environmental transition in progress. Jack sat by the pond one night, alone, while the visiting teams ran their nocturnal scans. The garden glowed faintly under the twin moons. He closed his eyes. For the first time since Crashdown, he felt, not like a castaway, but a caretaker. Willa appeared beside him, barefoot and sleepy. She leaned against his arm. "Do you think she's happy now?" she asked. Jack looked up at the canopy of fronds, the spirals of light, the floating seed dust that drifted like slow snow. I think," he said, "she's finally dreaming back." The wind shifted, just enough to rustle the leaves.